What you're seeing now is not fiction. This is the real thing that's happening every day. Your men, your machines, darkening Nazi skies in ever-increasing numbers, helping to bring the promise of freedom to the enslaved on the far-flung battlefronts of the world. And there they go, Canada's youth, worthy successors to men like Bishop, Barker, Collishaw, and other great airmen. So into the dusk and on into the night, our bombers set their course for the objective. This operation is typical of the work these lads are doing today. Men who yesterday were students from the Maritimes, clerks in our eastern cities, miners of the far north, farmers from the golden wheat fields of the west, yes, and lumbermen from the tall timbers of British Columbia. To you, the men of the Royal Canadian Air Force, the men who fly its aircraft, and the men on the ground who keep them flying, we pay tribute. Tension inside the crew room before the flight is like the locker room at school before the big hockey game. Everyone is under a certain nervous strain from the time he knows what the target is to be until he's on the way. But like the hockey player, as soon as the whistle blows, he has no time for misgiving. Like the coach of the school team, the captain gives last-minute instructions to his men. To see these boys leaving for their aircraft, one would never think that they're soon to travel hundreds of hazardous miles through ice, fog, storms, and fire. They might be going to an old-fashioned corn roast on some nearby beach. Every minute of the day, these men of Canada, your men, are proving their worth in the war against aggression. As you at home sit by your firesides and read or hear of strong formations of bombers over Germany night after night, you may well be proud that Canada is there in force with the Royal Air Force, adding weight to the hammer blows on the enemy. In Africa, too, with the 8th Army, and in other theaters of war, Canada and Canadians are helping to destroy the enemies of democracy. As production quickly...
Students, staff, and honored guests, welcome to our Remembrance Day program for 2024. We are here today to acknowledge the courage and sacrifice of all those who have served in Canada's armed forces, especially those who have died for our country in war and military operations.
Before we go any further, please take a moment to turn off and put away your cell phones. And out of respect for those who served and those who died, please remain as quiet and attentive as possible during today's ceremony. Everyone, please stand now for the marching of the flags and the singing of our national anthem.
Please be seated. At Strathcona High, we acknowledge all the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit whose footsteps have marked this territory for centuries, a place that has welcomed peoples from around the world to make their home here. An estimated 500 Indigenous soldiers have died while serving in Canada's armed forces, including a Métis graduate from Strathcona High School, John Inkster. Lance Corporal John Inkster was killed in the Battle of the Somme on September 15, 1916. Like other Indigenous warriors who died for Canada in the World Wars, John Inkster is buried overseas, far from his ancestral land, lest we forget. This year's Remembrance Day program will memorialize Scona grads who fought for Canada in the Second World War. Please turn your attention to one of the screens while we play a video that focuses on some of the 1,000 and plus Scona grads who have served in Canada's military during World War II.
Summer right on the beach of how I look today. I've been hiding out so long, I gotta find another way. Late at night am I just living in the space between the beauty and the pain? And the real thing. Now the sky is painted in a wash of indigo. I've been holding on too long that I hardly know the score. I recognize every face
In the next part of the program, we will focus on 10 Skona grads who died fighting for Canada in World War II. On the screen, you can see the names and faces of these 10 fallen servicemen. It is hoped that their specific war stories will help us to better understand and appreciate the courage and sacrifice of all Canadians who have served and who still serve in Canada's armed forces. These 10 Skona Lords served with distinction in World War II. 2 of them were decorated fighter aces. One was a squadron leader. Another was a wing commander of 3 squadrons. One of them was a combat engineer. 3 were fighter pilots, 2 were bomber pilots, and the remaining 4 were airmen from Bomber Command. These men fought in some of the most consequential military campaigns in Canadian history, including the Battle of Britain, the Battle of the Atlantic, the Italian campaign, the air war against Germany, and the Normandy invasion. 9 of these Skona grads died overseas. 1 died in Canada during a training accident. One of these fallen Skona Lords is buried 10 kilometers from here in Edmonton's Beechmount Cemetery. 8 others are buried in military cemeteries in 4 different countries: England, France, Italy, and the Netherlands. And one of them never received a proper burial. His remains are lost on the bottom of the English Channel. All 10 Skona grads died tragically. 1 was killed by a landmine. 1 was struck by lightning. 2 were killed by anti-aircraft fire. 2 perished in air combat. 3 died in plane crashes, and 1 was executed by agents of the Nazi Gestapo. Lest we forget. Ladies and gentlemen, please stand now for the roll call for the fallen. Jada Stretch, Rosamilia Sanchez, and Pia Disqua will read and honor the names of our 10 fallen Skona Lords. This is Strathcona High School's Honor Roll for Remembrance Day 2024.
Flying Officer Ernest James Allen, 439 Squadron, Royal Canadian Air Force, Combat Support.
Died for Canada.
Moore pour le Canada.
Flying Officer James McVicker Clement, 405 Squadron, Royal Canadian Air Force, Bomber Command, Evader.
Died for Canada.
Moore pour le Canada.
Pilot Officer George William Rupert Dalton, 427 Squadron, Royal Canadian Air Force, Bomber Command.
Died for Canada.
Moore pour le Canada.
Sergeant Arthur Harry Figg, 103 Squadron, Royal Canadian Air Force, Bomber Command.
Died for Canada.
Moore pour le Canada.
Lieutenant Robert Charles Foster, 1st Field Company, Royal Canadian Engineers.
Died for Canada.
Moore pour le Canada.
Squadron Leader Lionel Manley Gons, Fighter Ace, Distinguished Flying Cross, 41 Squadron, Royal Canadian Air Force, Fighter Command.
Died for Canada.
Moore pour le Canada.
Flying Officer Charles Thomas Hartley, 51 Squadron, Royal Canadian Air Force, Bomber Command.
Died for Canada.
Moore pour le Canada.
Flying Officer John Donald Heacock, No. 8 Bombing School, Royal Canadian Air Force, Commonwealth Air Training Program.
Died for Canada.
Moore pour le Canada.
Flying Officer Ernest Stollery, 405 Squadron, Royal Canadian Air Force, Bomber Command.
Died for Canada.
Moore pour le Canada.
Wing Commander James Elmsley Walker, Fighter Ace, Distinguished Flying Cross and 2 bars, 144 Wing, Royal Canadian Air Force, Fighter Command.
Died for Canada.
Moore pour le Canada. Please remain standing. At Strathcona High School, we remember our own because that is who we are. Remembrance Day is about our ideals and what we stand for. It is a time to reflect on the legacy that previous generations have left for us. It is an occasion for solemn contemplation about the cost of freedom. It is also a time to reflect on what we can do to bring peace to our troubled world.
We are commemorating these 10 fallen Skona Lords today because they gave their lives in the service of our nation. These Canadians answered Canada's call to arms. They were all volunteers. They fought for freedom, on land and in the air. They helped to liberate millions of people in Europe and North Africa from enemy occupation. These Skona soldiers and airmen are part of the proud history of our school and our nation, a long history of service, patriotism, and honor. Our fallen should never be forgotten.
Everyone, please remain standing until you are invited to be seated. I will now recite the Act of Remembrance. They shall grow not old, as we are that left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them. Everyone, please repeat after me. We will remember them. We will remember them. Hannah Shipman will now play the last post, which will be followed by the 2 minutes of silence and the playing of the rouse. Please remain standing until you are invited to be seated. A lament for the fallen. This video will memorialize the 10 fallen Skona Lords from this year's honor roll.
The long and winding road that leads to your door will never disappear. I've seen that road before. Many times I've been alone, and many times I've cried. Anyway, you'll never know the many ways I've tried, and still they lead me back to the long, winding road. You left me standing here a long, long time ago. Don't keep me waiting here. Lead me to your door. But still they lead me back to the long, winding road. You left me standing here a long, long time ago. Don't keep me waiting here. Lead me to your door. Yeah, 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 yeah.
Everyone, please stand for the commitment to remember. I will now recite the commitment to remember. They were young as we are young. They served, giving freely of themselves. To them, we pledge amid the winds of time to carry their torch and never forget. We will remember them. Everyone, please repeat after me. We will remember them. Ladies and gentlemen, you may now be seated for the rest of the program.
Alyssa Klein will now present a tribute to Skona grad Lionel Gauntz. He was a decorated air ace who fought in the Battle of Britain.
Staff and students of Strathcona, I am here to commemorate one of Canada's great military heroes, Squadron Leader Lionel Gauntz. He was a World War II fighter pilot and a hero of the Battle of Britain. He was also a graduate of Strathcona High School. Lionel Gauntz was a fighter ace with a big personality whose exploits made headlines in newspapers across Canada and throughout the United Kingdom. I'm here today to use the headlines to tell his story. A story of gallantry and adversity that was once familiar to millions of Canadians. Sadly, this is a story that has faded from our collective memory in recent decades. After graduating from Strathcona High School, Lionel Gauntz took flying lessons offered by the Edmonton Aero Club in the city centre airport. When he received his pilot's license, Lionel Gauntz stunned his friends and family by applying for admission to Britain's Royal Air Force. He wanted to be a fighter pilot at a time when Canada's Air Force was almost non-existent. So Gauntz decided that joining the RAF was the best way to realize his dream. To everyone's great surprise, the RAF admitted him for training as a fighter pilot. In the RAF, Gauntz quickly became an accomplished aviator who embodied all the traits of an effective fighter pilot: confidence, spatial awareness, situational awareness, determination, decisiveness, and daring. When the RAF staged air shows for the public, Lionel Gauntz was chosen to perform the most dangerous feats of aerobatics. No matter how dangerous the stunt, Gauntz remained calm and unflappable. Other pilots began calling him Elmer because of his nonchalance. Lionel Gauntz fit the stereotype of fighter pilots we see in movies today. He was always pushing the envelope. He sometimes broke the rules. He could be undisciplined, and he tested the patience of superior officers. Like the Pete Mitchell character in the Top Gun movies, he even got in trouble for buzzing the control tower at his airbase. Lionel Gauntz's call sign was Elmer, but Maverick would have been suitable too. Lionel Gauntz distinguished himself on early combat missions in World War II. In the spring of 1940, he shot down 2 planes in France during the German invasion. He was recommended for a Distinguished Flying Cross for this achievement, but the paperwork was lost during the chaotic fall of France. Next, Gauntz provided air cover for British and French troops during the Dunkirk evacuation. His courage and combat effectiveness resulted in a promotion to flight leader. But Lionel Gauntz is best remembered for his heroism in the Battle of Britain. The Battle of Britain was a long series of German air attacks against Great Britain during the summer of 1940. This was an attempt to neutralize Britain's Royal Air Force so that Hitler could launch an all-out German invasion of the British Isles. The Battle of Britain was a pivotal episode in World War II. If the Germans had won the battle, they would have won the war. The only thing standing in the way of a German victory was a few hundred fighter pilots from Great Britain, Canada, and the British Commonwealth. Skona's Lionel Gauntz was one of these fighter pilots. Above all, Lionel Gauntz was renowned in the Royal Air Force for his aggressiveness. Other fighter pilots remarked that Gauntz did not care what the odds were as long as he was in a scrap. This aggressiveness can be seen in a famous air battle that took place over the iconic White Cliffs of Dover on July 14, 1940. The battle began in the skies above Dover when Gauntz and 2 other fighter pilots from 615 Squadron were attacked by 40 German warplanes. With no hesitation, Gauntz dove into the thick of enemy formation, shooting down 2 German planes and scattering the others. He was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross for this action. Flight Lieutenant Lionel Gauntz was awarded his Distinguished Flying Cross by King George VI at Buckingham Palace in August 1940. Here's the citation that was read at the award ceremony. This flight commander has displayed excellent coolness and leadership since the return of his squadron to England. On July 14th, his flight took part in resisting an air attack on Dover, when 3 of our aircraft were attacked by 40 Junker 87s. At least 2 of the enemy were shot down. Flight Lieutenant Gauntz has shot down 3 enemy aircraft since returning to England. At the awards ceremony, Gauntz was introduced to the King as the gallant young Canadian that everyone was talking about. Back at his base, when a celebration of Gaunt's DFC was interrupted by a German bombing raid, Gauntz took to the skies with his wingman, Dutch Hugo, and shot down 3 of the attacking planes. These incidents helped to cement Gauntz's legendary status in the RAF. They also qualified him as an ace, a fighter pilot with at least 5 confirmed kills. One newspaper reporter remarked that Gauntz was famous for his hobby of tangling with more Nazis than he could handle. There was some truth in this observation. Lionel Gauntz was shot down 5 times during the Battle of Britain. Each time he parachuted to safety from a flaming aircraft, but an hour or 2 later, Gauntz would be back in the skies in a new fighter plane. In the Battle of Britain, aircraft could be replaced quickly, but not skilled pilots. Gauntz knew that if a German bailed out of his plane over England, he would be quickly captured and imprisoned in a POW camp for the rest of the war. But if a British or Canadian pilot bailed out over England, he would be back in the thick of battle in no time. Since the Germans also understood that pilots were more valuable than planes in the Battle of Britain, they began shooting at pilots who were descending on parachutes. Knowing this, Gauntz had the presence of mind to delay pulling his ripcord until the last possible moment. In one air battle, RAF pilots witnessed the spectacle of Gauntz free falling in the middle of a gigantic air battle involving at least 100 warplanes. Gauntz waited until he was clear of the melee before deploying his parachute. Shortly after this incident, Lionel Gauntz was promoted to squadron leader of one of the best fighter squadrons in the RAF. Although outnumbered by a much larger German air force, the RAF won the Battle of Britain by shooting down many more warplanes than they lost. Eventually, Adolf Hitler pulled the plug on the Battle of Britain in order to preserve what was left of his air force for his planned invasion of Russia. In the end, a few hundred fighter pilots had saved Britain from defeat. About 10% of the fighter pilots who fought in the Battle of Britain were Canadians like Lionel Gauntz. And in a titanic struggle, when the margin between victory and defeat was razor thin, these brave Canadians made a real difference. British Prime Minister Winston Churchill paid tribute to the fighter pilots of the Battle of Britain by declaring that never was so much owed by so many to so few. The British government commissioned a series of portraits of the greatest heroes of the Battle of Britain. Lionel Gauntz was one of the pilots selected for this honor. This is the portrait of Lionel Gauntz that was done by British artist Cuthbert Ord. In this portrait, Lionel Gauntz looks much older than his 25 years. His face shows signs of battle damage. He has a deep scar on his chin, a crease from a bullet on his lip, and several burn marks from air battles and plane crashes. In November 1940, Gauntz had to be hospitalized for ulcers and post-traumatic stress. The high tension of the Battle of Britain had taken its toll on him. The pilot, who was renowned for being fearless and cool-headed, was wrestling with formidable inner demons. But after a few weeks in hospital and on stress leave, squadron leader Lionel Gauntz went back to flying fighter missions against the Nazis. In 1941, the Canadian ace added to his tally of air victories. He was credited with 9 confirmed or probable kills, in addition to the damage that he inflicted on numerous other enemy warplanes. Lionel Gauntz's luck finally ran out during a raid on a Nazi airfield in France in November 1941. His Spitfire was hit by an enemy anti-aircraft fire and plunged into the English Channel. News of Lionel Gauntz's death made headlines across Canada and the United Kingdom. The public reaction was somber because Gauntz had been an inspirational hero for millions in wartime Canada and Britain. To honor squadron leader Lionel Gauntz, the Government of Canada named a mountain in Jasper National Park after him. Mount Gauntz is located 317 kilometers west of Edmonton. Surely no other war hero has been given a more majestic memorial monument than Skona's Lionel Gauntz.
The Strathcona Singers will now perform The White Cliffs of Dover. This was one of the most popular songs of the Second World War. It is a song about the Battle of Britain. The bluebirds in the song are the British and Canadian pilots who wore blue Air Force uniforms. In the song, the bluebirds are over the White Cliffs of Dover each day to defend against the new waves of attacking German warplanes. The White Cliffs of Dover is a song of hope and courage, and a confident prediction of ultimate victory for the Allies in World War II. Today's performance of the song is dedicated to Skona's Lionel Gauntz, who won a Distinguished Flying Cross for a heroic dogfight over the White Cliffs of Dover in July 1940.
I'll never forget the people I met, braving those angry skies. I remember well as the shadows fell, the light of hope in their eyes.
And though I'm far away, I still can hear them say, thumbs up. For when the dawn comes up,
There'll be bluebirds over the white cliffs of Dover tomorrow. Just you wait and see. There'll be love and laughter and peace ever after tomorrow when the world is free. The shepherd will tend his sheep, the valley will bloom again, and Jimmy will go to sleep in his own little room again. There'll be bluebirds over the white cliffs of Dover tomorrow. Just you wait and see. There'll be love and laughter and peace ever after tomorrow when the world is free.
Ms. Jansen will now read a eulogy that was written for SCONA's Lionel Gauntz by Canadian war correspondent Paul Malone. It was published in Canadian newspapers in December 1941. The eulogy represents a different side of Lionel Gauntz, one that was familiar only to Lionel's closest friends.
The Spirit of Lionel Gauntz Carries On by Paul Malone, Canadian war correspondent, December 19th, 1941. Lionel is sleeping now. Until a few weeks ago, he was squadron leader Lionel Gauntz, one of the most colorful aces in the Royal Air Force, the RAF. Now he's at rest. Lionel was famous. So when he was reported missing last month, Canadian newspapers ran stories about his exploits. One story recalled that he celebrated last year by shooting down 2 German bombers which attempted to interfere with the festivities at his airport. The story called him a madcap flyer, described his career as hectic, and emphasized his disregard for discipline. It was a good story, cleverly written, but it didn't picture the real Lionel Gauntz. I happen to know, because I grew up with him in Alberta and flew as his passenger in Britain before the war. This is the rest of Lionel's story. He wasn't clever at school. His teachers sometimes despaired of him ever amounting to anything. He led a carefree life, unworried about his future. Athletics aroused his enthusiasm, but studies left him cold. He was popular, but none of his friends predicted he would become a great man. He earned money for flying lessons in Edmonton by working on farms and construction projects. When he left for England in 1937 to join the Royal Air Force, many of his friends thought he'd soon be back. His critics were certain he could do nothing well. They, as critical people often are, were wrong. When I next saw him in England a few months before the outbreak of war, Lionel Gauntz was one of the outstanding personalities of the RAF. He was handsome in his uniform. He was the master of his destiny. English airmen trained in elite schools and prestigious universities idolized him. They called him Elmer and looked to him for leadership in the air and on the ground. Lionel Gauntz was the RAF's outstanding exponent of aerobatics. Civilians and even some of his colleagues called him reckless. But Lionel wasn't reckless. He believed in himself and the fighter planes that British workmen had made for him. First Gladiators, then Hurricanes, and finally Spitfires. As a fighter pilot, Lionel Gauntz knew he was in a dangerous game, and he was playing that game as he thought it should be played. The boy from the prairies had become a great social success. Upper crust people in England entertained him. Famous people were proud to know him. He was at ease in drawing rooms and in ballrooms. The transformation in Lionel Gauntz amazed me. But I soon found that he was the same Lionel at heart. In only two places was he happy. One was the cockpit of his Spitfire. The other was in his home with the English girl he had married and their young son and infant daughter. Because Lionel could not be in both places at once, he never was completely happy. Finally, his Spitfire took him away and failed to bring him back. His wife, Queenie, their son, Paul, and their daughter, Susan, are left alone now. Lionel knew it was coming. He knew that his luck and skill would fail him someday. For the sake of his family, he accepted for a short time a position in the air ministry that kept him on the ground. But he couldn't stand it for long. His wife understood. She gave him back to his Spitfire. His spirits soared with his plane as he rocketed once more through the skies that he loved. But Lionel Gauntz was tired, very tired. His sensitive spirit was weary. His handsome, youthful body was old and exhausted before its time. Lionel Gauntz was a hero to the world, but really, he was just a boy from Canada who wanted to do all he could to save freedom. He gave everything, including his life. Sleep and rest came to him on November 19th, 1941. His shattered Spitfire ditched in the English Channel after a daring daylight sweep over France. Anxious comrades hovered above the plane, watching it in the hope he would crawl out and attempt to swim. He'd done it before. But this time, his work was done. Lionel's body remained motionless in the cockpit while his plane took on water. A moment later, the Spitfire sank to the bottom of the English Channel, taking Lionel with it. Lionel Gauntz is sleeping, but he's not dead. Like the thousands of brave Canadian and Allied airmen who are sleeping with him, he'll never die while freedom is considered worth fighting for. While the fight goes on, these fallen airmen will rest in peace. And on the day of victory, and forever thereafter, these fallen heroes will live in our hearts.
Next, Principal Vangenhoven will now pay tribute to Skona's Jim Clement. Jim Clement was a bomb aimer on a Lancaster bomber who was shot down behind enemy lines in 1944.
Skona, it's my honor and privilege this morning to tell you the story of Canadian and Skona hero Jim Clement. In France, at an airfield near the city of Tours, there is a monument to 26 people who were shot by the Nazis in 1944. The inscription on the monument reads as follows: in memory of the 26 victims of German barbarism shot at the St. Symphorium Aviation Camp, August 9, 1944. On the monument, there are the names of 26 victims who were executed there. One of the names is a Canadian, a man from Edmonton named Jim Clement, who was a Skona grad. So after graduating from high school, Jim Clement volunteered for military service in the Canadian Air Force. He was trained to be a bomb aimer on a bomber aircraft, and he was sent overseas on March 1943 and was assigned to the elite Pathfinder bombing squadron. On the night of June 11, 1944, Jim's crew participated in an air raid on the railway yards at Tours. While flying over the target, the Lancaster bomber was hit by anti-aircraft fire, and the crew was forced to bail out over enemy territory. Shortly after Jim had parachuted down to the farmer's field, he was met by a member of the French resistance who hustled him away to a hiding place on a nearby farm. And the French resistance was an underground movement that resisted the German occupation of France during the Second World War. They made hit and run on German troops. Resistance fighters disrupted German supply lines by blowing up bridges and railways. They also helped downed airmen evade capture and imprisonment by the Germans. Jim was fortunate to be taken to the farm of a fellow by the name of Roger Boddenau. And since the summer of 1940, Boddenau and his two sons, Raoul and Daniel, helped to smuggle dozens of Allied airmen across the border into Vichy, France, and then across the French border into neutral Spain. But this time, the situation was different. 5 days previously, on the 6th of June, tens of thousands of Allied troops, including thousands of Canadians, landed on the French coast on D-Day. In response to this invasion, the Germans sent thousands of troops into the Tours area to block the Allied advance. So rather than trying to smuggle Clement out of an area crawling with German soldiers, Boddenau decided it was just best to sit tight, wait for Allied troops to liberate the area. In the meantime, Boddenau hid Clement in a dugout in a wooded area behind his farmhouse. In July, a resistance fighter called the Postman was brought a message for Jim Clement from Dick Malcolm. And Dick Malcolm was the pilot of the bomber that had been shot down, and he was hiding in a farm not so far away. Through the Postman, Jim sent a return message letting Malcolm know he was okay, uninjured, and he was awaiting liberation from the Allied forces. Unfortunately, shortly after visiting the Boddenau farm, the Postman was involved in a shootout with agents of the Nazi secret police, the feared Gestapo. Sadly, the message from Jim Clement was found in the pocket of the dead Postman, along with other letters that revealed the identity of at least one local resistance fighter. The Germans now had enough information to begin tracking down the resistance fighter and Jim. 26 individuals would be eventually rounded up by the Nazis using the letters found in the pocket of the Postman. On the morning of July 24th, 1944, a large contingent of Gestapo agents arrived at the Boddenau farm. They bound and gagged Roger Boddenau and his wife Marcella. Then, get this, they took their 15-year-old son, Daniel, they filled a rubber hose with sand, and they beat him mercilessly for an hour in front of his parents. This brutality continued until Danielle revealed the hiding place of Jim. The Gestapo then took Bodno, his wife Marcella, and James Clement back to the Nazi prison in Tours. Since Clement had been found wearing civilian clothes, he was not treated as a prisoner of war. Instead, Jim was subjected to 15 days of brutal torture and interrogation. The Gestapo were after the names of the resistance fighters and the whereabouts of the other Canadian airman, Dick Malcolm. On August 9, 1944, Jim Clement, Roger Bodno, and 24 other members of the French resistance were transported by truck to the Sant-Symphorium aviation camp on the edge of Tours. There they were tied to wooden posts and one by one shot in the back of the head. Then their bodies were buried together in a mass grave. The fate of Jim Clement would remain a mystery for more than 2 years. Then in December 1946, investigators found the mass grave at the camp and identified Clement from his badly damaged remains. Flying officer Jim Clement was then given a proper burial in a military cemetery in Tours. Fast forward to 2012, so 12 years ago, Jim Clement's son, Jim Jr., visited his father's gravesite in France for the first time. Jim Jr. had never met his father because his mother had been pregnant with him when his dad had gone to war. This is the photo of Jim Jr. with Daniel Bodno at Jim's Clement grave in 2012. And remember, Daniel was the fellow that the Gestapo tortured to get the information of the whereabouts of Clement. Both Jim Jr. and Daniel worried that the other men would blame him for the death of the father, but neither man felt this way. This brought great solace to both the Canadian and the Frenchman. So Jim Clement's story is a testimony to courage of the members of the anti-Nazi resistance movement. It also lays bare the moral degeneracy of Adolf Hitler and the Nazis. And it reveals what Canadians were fighting for in World War II. Canadians fought long and hard to defeat the Nazis, but Canadians also fought to liberate millions of ordinary people from the enemy occupation. James Clement, and get this, was one of 45,000 Canadians who were killed in the Second World War so that the people of Europe, North Africa, and Asia could be set free. Canada remembers, and Skona remembers. And P.S., if you go to the Michener entrance, you can find Jim Clement's name on the memorial glass in the Michener entrance.
Thank you, Principal Vangenhoven. Abby Dave will now recite the poem, The Man with the Broken Fingers. This poem is dedicated to Skona's Jim Clement, who made the ultimate sacrifice for the cause of freedom.
Let us heed the message of the man with the broken fingers. It comes to us from the shadowlands of Nazi-occupied Europe, from the Netherlands and Norway, from Poland and France. From there, this man calls out to us. He lives and speaks a sign language of lost fingers. Shrines in our hearts we should have for this man. Shrines in our hearts because he refused to remember the names the Gestapo wanted. Tell us these names. Who are they? Talk. We want names. And the man faced them, looked them in the eye, and hours passed, and no names came. Hours and hours, and no names for the Gestapo. They told him that they would break him as they had broken others. The rubber hose slammed around his face and neck. Tell us these names. Who are they? Talk. We want names. Names now or else. and no names came. Over and over, and no names. So, one by one, they broke the fingers on the left hand. First, they crushed the little finger. 3 other fingers came next. And then the left thumb bent till it broke. Still no names. And so they went to work on the fingers of the right hand. The little finger felt itself twisted. Then other fingers found themselves mangled and mutilated. And when its turn came, the right thumb shrieked when it was shattered. Did he think of violins and accordions that he would never touch again? Or a woman's hand that he could never hold again? Or pencils or pens that were no good to him anymore? There was more to come. We give you one last chance to cooperate. Give us names. Yet he had no names for them. He locked his tongue. He pitted his will against Nazi will. He clung to his belief in the cause of freedom. Therefore, they brought against him their final acts of fury. And eventually, he lost all memories of names, even his own. So then, the Gestapo had no further use for him, and his brave life came to a sudden end. But there are those like you and me and many, many others who should never forget the man with the broken fingers, so that his torch is taken up, so that the light of freedom continues to shine, so that his sacred fingers can speak, so that we learn never to say yes, 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 when the answer is no, no, no.
Hannah Pete and Hassan Sajjad will now present the war story of SCONA's Tom Templeman. He was a downed pilot who attempted a daring escape from Nazi-controlled France in the summer of 1942.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is our privilege to be here today to memorialize Tom Templeman, a SCONA grad who was the pilot of a Sterling bomber during the Second World War. Tom Templeman is notable in history for an epic getaway from the Nazis after he parachuted from a stricken airplane over enemy territory in 1942. This great evader was awarded the Distinguished Flying Medal for manifesting dogged determination and indomitable willpower during one of the most incredible escapes of World War II. SCONA's Tom Templeman personified gallantry in the face of adversity. He is worthy of our remembrance.
Tom Templeman attended SCONA in the late 1930s and worked as a plumber after graduation. When war broke out, he volunteered for military service in the Royal Canadian Air Force. He was trained to be a bomber pilot. In 1941, he was sent overseas to fly missions with Bomber Command.
On the night of June 16, 1942, Tom Templeman's Sterling bomber took off from an airbase in England for a bombing raid on an industrial target in Germany's Rhineland. After dropping its bombs, Templeman's aircraft came under attack by 2 German fighter planes. Gunfire from the German warplanes set the bomber ablaze and killed 2 crew members. Tom Templeman ordered the surviving airmen to bail out of the stricken plane. When they had done so, Templeman left the cockpit and parachuted from the plummeting aircraft. It was a short drop to the ground below. Templeman had bailed out too low, at a mere 600 feet. He hit the ground hard, breaking his ankle.
Flight Sergeant Tom Templeman had landed on the border between Nazi-occupied France and Nazi-occupied Belgium. If he didn't make a break for it, his landing spot and the nearby crash site would soon be swarming with German soldiers. Templeman cut some wire from a nearby fence line and wrapped it around the boot encompassing his broken ankle. And then, in great pain, he began hobbling southward. The Germans soon arrived to begin their manhunt. Tom Templeman did his best to evade them. After limping along for about 5 kilometers, he found a good hiding place. He crawled beneath a hollowed-out log. From this vantage point, Templeman spotted a German sentry who was standing less than 200 meters away. Then, the Canadian pilot went to sleep and hoped for the best.
In the morning, Tom Templeman made a sober assessment of his situation. His only escape path was a 700-mile journey straight south, through Nazi-occupied northern France, through Nazi collaborationist southern France, and across the border into neutral Spain. This would be a 700-mile trek through enemy territory. Templeman would have to accomplish this feat on a broken ankle while wearing the distinctive blue uniform of the RCAF. In his pocket, he had an escape kit with a small amount of food. He estimated the odds of reaching Spain to be slim to none.
Tom Templeman stayed under the hollowed-out log until sunset, then hiked all night. Walking on his ankle was extremely painful. A burning pain shot through his leg and made him feel faint. But he had no option but to push forward. For the next 4 days, Templeman headed south at night, carefully avoiding roads, towns, and villages. He swam across several canals.
After having gone about 50 kilometers, Templeman began walking in daylight, hoping to make better time. But while walking on the outskirts of town, he was spotted by a French gendarme who found Templeman's dirty clothing suspicious. The gendarme arrested Templeman and tossed him in the town jail. Templeman woke up in his jail cell just before midnight. He was surprised to see that the cell door was wide open. He peered out of his cell and could not see anyone, so he made a break for the door and escaped into the night. Once again, he headed south.
Despite the setback with the gendarme, Tom Templeman continued to travel by day and sleep at night. He sometimes walked up to farmers and communicated with them by using his high school level French. His French was rudimentary, but adequate. The French farmers were friendly, but frightened. One provided him with a jar of milk. Another washed his clothes for him, provided him with a razor to shave with, and allowed him to take a bath. At one farm, he traded his watch for some cash and a French army compass. One woman handed him a sack filled with boiled eggs. Another gave him some maps.
On July 5th, Tom Templeman crossed the demarcation line between Nazi-occupied northern France and Vichy France, the fascist puppet regime in southern France. He was now managing 30 kilometers per day and his ankle pain was diminishing, but his boots were now falling apart. Luckily, he met a Frenchman on the road who took him to his farmhouse where he cut off his wired boot and gave him a new pair of shoes. The man offered him some civilian clothing too, but Templeman feared that he would be shot as a spy if the fascist militia caught him out of uniform. It seemed improbable that he had come so far in his RCAF uniform, but Templeman came to understand that, during wartime, people encountered so many different kinds of uniforms that most people stopped paying attention to them. Templeman found farmers in Vichy France less friendly than those in the north. He endured a week without eating anything while desperately and unsuccessfully begging for food. To survive, he began stealing food.
In the first week of August, after more than 40 days of walking on a broken ankle, Sergeant Pilot Tom Templeman crossed over from France into neutral Spain. It was an amazing achievement for an evader, especially for an injured one who had received no guidance, shelter, or medical aid. Templeman was so excited about reaching Spain that he pushed on after dark on a mountain trail in the Pyrenees.
Hiking at night in the mountains was a big mistake. Templeman lost his footing on the trail and fell into a ravine that was 7 meters deep. He broke his back in the fall. In appalling pain, he crawled for hours until he came to a farmer's cottage. He was driven by the farmer to the nearest police station where he surrendered to the authorities.
Instead of taking him to a hospital, Templeman was shuffled between a jail, a prison, and an internment camp. After nearly 2 months of captivity, he was finally set free at the end of September, still suffering from extreme back pain and barely able to walk. He managed to get to the British military base at Gibraltar, where he's flown to Britain on a medical plane.
Tom Templeman arrived at his home airfield in Britain on October 6, 1942, nearly 4 months after his disappearance. The story of his remarkable escape was front-page news in the United Kingdom and Canada. When a reporter asked how he had made it all the way from northern France to Spain on a bad leg, he gave a simple answer: I walked. To recover from his broken back and badly damaged ankle, Tom Templeman would have to spend several months in plaster casts and several more in painful rehabilitation. He was not able to return to Canada until August 21st, 1943. But he returned to Canada as a hero and was awarded the Distinguished Flying Medal for his great evasion.
Here is the official citation for Tom Templeman's Distinguished Flying Medal. It reads as follows. In most hazardous circumstances, Sergeant Pilot Tom Templeman displayed great fortitude and determination in keeping with the highest traditions of the Royal Canadian Air Force. He has proved himself to be an outstanding airman who has set an exceptionally high standard by his courageous example and his extreme devotion to duty.
Today, as we honor Tom Templeman's memory, we recognize that his story is not just about one man's extraordinary journey. It's about the courage, resilience, and spirit that define true heroism. After the war, Tom Templeman continued his life in Edmonton, and his legacy lives on as an inspiration to us all, a reminder of the power of determination, the strength of the human spirit, and the sacrifices made by a Strathcona student for the freedoms we cherish.
Everyone, please remain seated and attentive until we have finished our closing remarks. On behalf of Principal Vangenhoven, I would like to thank you for participating in the commemoration of our fallen Canadians from the Second World War.
And on behalf of Mr. Pendlebury and the Remembrance Day Committee, I would also like to thank everyone who contributed to today's ceremony. Speakers, performers, artists, technicians, administrators, teachers, support staff, and planners. And a special thank you to Mr. Robinson, our honorary school historian and retired social studies department head, who put together such an amazing presentation today.
Block 3 starts at 1:07 p.m. We ask that everyone leave the gym today in a respectful, orderly, and dignified manner. Staff and students, before you head out for your lunch, please fold the chairs and stack them on the carts. Enjoy your lunch break, have a great afternoon, and a wonderful fall break. Goodbye, everyone.